The Asia Cloud Computing Association is a trade association of cloud service providers. But the work that I do is primarily to think about how cloud service providers can best fit into, right now the work I'm working on is working on the regulated industries. Particularly I've been focusing on the financial services industry. Before that, we were looking at data sovereignty and the flow of data across borders. We did a report on that 2 years ago that I'd commend to you. Really to look at how the laws of general applicability, the privacy laws in those countries, the law enforcement requirements, how those things affected a company's ability to store data in the cloud using a cloud service provider. But this report, we looked at a major challenge that the FSIs, financial service institutions, have concerns about regulatory compliance and ensuring the security of business processes and data. Regulators are concerned that they will lose regulatory authority over financial institutions and their ability to ensure that regulated entities are meeting their requirements. They need to be sure that those are not compromised. To compound these concerns, there is a lot of confusion, as well you know, and misperceptions and misunderstanding about cloud. So all of this has slowed cloud adoption by the financial services industry. However, FSIs and regulators, with the help of cloud service providers, are improving the understanding of cloud services and together are finding solutions to benefit from cloud computing while complying with their regulatory requirements. The ACCA commissioned Allswang Asia, a law firm here in Singapore, working with other contributors from 14 countries to develop an easy reference for cloud service providers to better understand the regulatory environment affecting FSI adoption and the use of cloud computing. The report provides an issue-by-issue and country-by-country analysis of the regulatory environment for FSIs, with specific recommendations for cloud service providers to comply with the current regulations and recommendations for regulators to improve the regulatory landscape, providing CSPs with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape and what they can and should do to accelerate cloud adoption by FSIs. In an effort to address the concerns and bring clarity, ACCA commissioned the law firm that has both IT and financial service clients to examine the laws and guidelines that may apply to FSI adoption and cloud computing and provide recommendations. One that will help the cloud service providers and FSPs get to a deal, enable FSIs to comfortably adopt cloud services, begin to get the benefits of those services, and two, provide country-specific analysis to help CSPs understand each of the 14 regulatory environments. But also for the governments to identify what they can do to improve the regulatory environment for FSI adoption of cloud while retaining their oversight ability and protecting what they must ensure. The report came out of the need for two industries to better understand each other, primarily for cloud service providers to help them understand their customers, but also for FSIs and government policymakers to understand how cloud services can fit in a regulatory context. We looked, as ACCA always does, at 14 countries in the region: Australia, China, Hong Kong, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, New Zealand, Philippines, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, and Vietnam. And the primary industries of interest, banking and insurance. We gave each country a general scoring of green, amber, or red to indicate where they are on the recommendations we make. And as I said, there are country annexes that give detailed information about each country's laws in a lawyerless friendly way. In other words, a non-lawyer can read it. And we provide solutions, both for CSPs and for the regulators. Cloud computing seemed amorphous to financial service industry. All their data and business processes going up into a big white puffy cloud didn't sound like a good business decision, regardless of the benefits. FSI regulations seemed impenetrable to cloud service providers, and the sales conversations weren't going well. Regulators didn't like the big white puffy cloud image any more than FSIs, and so many were initially opposed to the use of cloud by FSIs, but that is no more. Regulators now understand. Our report will help all stakeholders to move the FSIs into the cloud in a safe, secure way in compliance with all regulations and business requirements. The report shines a spotlight on the key issues by explaining regulatory environment and describing for both the CSPs and the FSIs how cloud computing can fit into the regulated environment. The report also provides clear and specific recommendations for CSPs and for FSIs to help them match their services and the contracts to meet the needs of the regulatory compliance. Where there is a need, the report offers recommendations for regulatory change. The analysis is organized into 9 key issue areas: the process for adopting cloud, contracts for cloud services, data location, data use limitations, data segregation, audit, review and monitoring, security, business continuity and exit, so the CSP knows what to do with your data, or you know what to do with the customer's data at exit. For each of the 9 issues, a chart gives a snapshot of the analysis discussed, how the various jurisdictions address that issue, and where there is alignment with cloud deployment and where there is alignment amongst jurisdictions, along with specific recommendations. The key findings from our research in all 14 jurisdictions: first of all, no regulators prohibit the use of cloud computing in the financial services industry. On the contrary, and we know this certainly is true in Singapore, cloud services are increasingly being adopted by FSIs, and the regulators are very interested in seeing that happen. There are inconsistencies amongst the 14 jurisdictions in many areas of compliance, which can create challenges for both the financial institutions doing business in multiple jurisdictions and for the cloud service providers with data centers in more than one jurisdiction. The regulations in Hong Kong, Japan, and New Zealand, and now as of June in South Korea, comport with more of ACCA's recommendations than any other jurisdictions. And I note Korea particularly, they enacted new regulations this past June, specifically for financial service, which bring them in close alignment with ACCA's recommendations. The Philippines and China remain to have the most to do to enable cloud adoption by the financial services industry. Cloud service providers are addressing the concerns of regulators and FSIs. When I started this 3 years ago, started my discussions with the cloud service providers and with the financial services, there was a large gap in the discussion. They were not talking to each other in a constructive way. The cloud service providers had their model, their business model, and their products and their SLAs, and the banks had their regulatory requirements and their contractual requirements for their outsourcing, and there was a gap that was not being bridged. And as we started this exercise, talking to them, getting the cloud service providers to talk to the financial service companies, we found that they really could bridge that gap. And many companies now have changed the products that they're selling, have revised their SLAs. The financial service institutions are under a greater business imperative to consider cloud as a solution. And so they're looking more carefully at the newer cloud offerings that fit their needs. Cloud service providers are addressing the concerns of regulators and FSIs. They can maximize the benefit from the cloud use by ensuring that they are familiar with the FSI's regulatory landscape and able to assess the degree to which their offerings fit into the regulatory landscape. They're also in a better position now to work with the FSIs and regulators where appropriate to ensure a mutual understanding of how cloud services can fit into the business and regulatory requirements. All that said, regulators have a key role. Several jurisdictions are allowed in cloud service adoption under current regulations for outsourcing. In other countries, they're developing new regulations, not specific to cloud, but that clearly enable cloud adoption. So our recommendations, we have 5 major areas of recommendations. Accompanying the charts, this chart and other charts, are a detailed analysis and a comparison between the jurisdictions. For further detail on each country, we have a country-specific annex for each country describing the key laws and regulations, and they provide a reference to and citations to the relevant laws and regulators in each jurisdiction. Again, note that South Korea is reflecting more favorably. Let's see if this works. South Korea, the chart in the report, which is actually at the back of the room, and I would very much encourage you to pick up, shows recommendations 2, 3, and 4 are red for South Korea. The chart in the report has not been updated, but this is what it looks like now. And here's Singapore. I'll just highlight 2 issues at the moment, and we'll turn to Singapore a little bit more detail in a second. First of all, recommendation 2 provides that the regulators should have a clear process for adopting cloud. Singapore is working on new guidelines, but they have yet to be published, so we're looking forward to that. With regard to recommendation 4, they have work to do, in our view, in having less prescriptive terms in cloud service contracts. More should be left, as we would put it, to the FSI and the cloud service provider to work out, so there are less required language as required by the government. So just looking at one issue as an example, this chart shows that most jurisdictions don't require regulators to approve the adoption of cloud services, which is of course the case here in Singapore. However, most regulators do want to be notified, and indeed most regulators invited discussion so they can understand how the cloud service is going to be implemented by the financial service provider and how they're going to meet the regulatory requirements. This table illustrates the regulations on data location, whether data has to be maintained within the jurisdiction or may be located outside the jurisdiction, and what requirements or conditions must be met in the latter case. From here, you can take a look at the specific country annexes to get more detail. They provide answers to the key questions. As I said, relevant regulations with citations and links. We identify the regulatory authorities and provide a list of the key requirements for each of those countries. To look at Singapore, as I said, the annex discussion substantially fills in the details of this chart. Notably, there are no specific regulations dealing exclusively with cloud services, but indeed, MAS has been quite clear that they now permit cloud services for the regulated community. However, in September of 2014, MAS issued a consultation on its proposed new outsourcing notice and guidelines. The consultation suggests MAS will tighten some requirements on outsourcing. The key changes proposed by MAS relate to a more detailed due diligence process, including a requirement to carry out due diligence on the staff of a supplier, requirement to report adverse incidents to the MAS, and more detailed requirements covering regular audits and review of outsourcing engagements. It's not yet known when these rules will come into force, but they are an interesting development. As to security, you are probably well aware, in new 2013, as we've heard, IDA published the MTCS. It's a voluntary system, but it's a very important system for and a great model in Singapore. We also provide guidance for regulators following our recommendations. And so far, I have to note that the response from cloud service providers and the financial industry alike has been extremely well received. We want you to review the guide, the report, consider it for any application, even outside the FSI industry. We're looking next to the healthcare industry, but consider regulated industries, and you can evaluate them and your service against what we've described in this report. And with that, I'll end it and invite Robert back. Thank you.